Today's presentation is going to be on the cell theory, the differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and I'm going to real quickly go through a bunch of the organelles. We're going to cover the organelles much more in depth in future chapters, some of the more important organelles, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them right now. I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of their basic functions. So, cell theory. Cells are going to be the basic unit of life, and that means that you can't get smaller than a cell and still have a living thing. There are organisms that are single-celled. There are a lot of organisms that are multicellular like us, but you can't get smaller than a single cell and have a living thing. So they're the basic unit of life. All the organisms that we find on our planet are made up of cells. And all new cells come from pre-existing cells. So all new organisms come from their parents. This doesn't really deal with the where did those first cells come from. We're not really going to touch on that in this class because we don't know. So the difference between eukaryotes and prokaryotes. Eukaryotes are going to be multicellular, or they don't have to be multicellular, but they're going to be cells that have lots of organelles, a membrane-bound nucleus, and they're going to make up most organisms. So we think of eukaryotes, you're talking about plants and animals and funguses and the protists. Pretty much everything except bacteria is going to be a eukaryote. Prokaryotes are designed a little different. They don't have a nucleus. They don't have any organelles. Well, membrane-bound organelles. They do have ribosomes. They do have a loop of DNA, circular DNA, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the prokaryotes are going to be mostly the bacteria. The reason they're named these, pro means first, and so these were the first chromosomes. So they had circular DNA, and these are true chromosomes. We call them true because they're like us, and so they must be true. All right, so put myself over there. This is a eukaryotic cell. You can see all the organelles inside, mitochondria, the nucleus, the ER, the Golgi. Okay, we have all these organelles. And then over here we have a prokaryote. And this is comparable in size. Prokaryotic cells are much, much smaller than eukaryotic cells. Matter of fact, most of the organelles in eukaryotic cells are larger than prokaryotic cells, except for the ribosomes. So this is what a prokaryotic cell looks like on the inside. It's got a loop of DNA. It's circular. Now, it doesn't have to be like literally a circle, but if you followed it along and zipped along it and followed where it went, it forms a loop. So it's going to have a loop of DNA, some ribosomes, a cell membrane, a cell wall, sometimes flagella or cilia to move around. And they're tiny. This is a thumbtack, and if you think about the very tip of a thumbtack, you can put quite a few bacteria on the tip of a thumbtack. So this is the size of bacteria compared to the tip of a thumbtack. All right. So what organelles are we going to see in eukaryotic cells? One of them we talked a little bit about this chapter already is the cell membrane. Okay, the cell membrane is that bilayer. We're going to have some junctions between cell membranes, which don't really fit in anywhere else, so I'm just going to talk about them right now. Some of those junctions are called tight junctions, where we actually have like rivets between the cell membranes that really prevents anything, including bacteria, from moving from one side to the other side without passing through the cell. So, for example, in our digestive tract, all of the cells lining our digestive tract are riveted together so bacteria can't get in between those cells into our bodies. Okay, we call those tight junctions. Another type of junction we'll see in the cell membrane is a gap junction. Gap junctions allow molecules to move from cell to cell so that adjacent cells can communicate with one another. All right, so let's look at some of these organelles. So this is a nucleus. The nucleus is going to have a double layer. Okay, so it's super important stuff. So it's actually got two bilayers protecting it, and it's going to have some holes in it, nuclear pores, where RNA can leave the nucleus and go do its job. It'll have a nucleolus inside where molecules that help make up ribosomes are made. And it'll be full of our chromosomes. Okay, so you'll have a full set of chromosomes inside that nucleus that are going to control what happens inside the cell. And because it's controlling cells, it's also controlling our body. These are mitochondria. Mitochondria are the little power converters inside our cells. They're going to be important for converting sugar to ATP, and we'll learn a lot about those next chapter. This is the ER, the endoplasmic reticulum. It is going to be basically a transport system inside the cell. These are little protein factories. The ribosomes are little protein factories. A lot of them are on the surface of the ER. Proteins get made and then transported. A lot of times they get transported to regions of the ER where then they are blebbed off into a vacuole, and they go to the Golgi to get processed further. This would be a ribosome. This is where the actual proteins are made. Okay, and you can see here we have our rough ER. We have vesicles forming on the ER going over the Golgi. They get processed here. Sometimes we need to add sugars and make glycoproteins, or add fats and make lipoproteins, or we just need to modify the arrangement of the protein before it's functional. And then a lot of times they will leave the vesicle, the proteins will leave the vesicle and either bind with other things inside our cells, they'll go do jobs inside our cells, or they'll go and bind to the cell membrane and release a substance outside of the cell. These are lysosomes. They are going to be digestive. Basically, they're used for internal cellular digestion. When parts wear out, when cells take in food particles, things like that, where we need to digest something, we use lysosomes. The cytoskeleton is going to be made up of microtubules, intermediate filaments, and microfilaments, and it basically helps the cell keeps its shape. Cells oftentimes are cuboidal, or they might be long and skinny, or they might be round. The cell cytoskeleton helps it keep its shape. Cilia and flagella are used for movement. Pretty much, I think one of the only human cells would be a sperm that uses a flagella, but a lot of other, and we use cilia to move things around inside our body, but not so much the movement of our body. But a lot of other organisms use these, especially single-celled organisms, use cilia and flagella for movement. And then plants are going to have a few additional organelles. They lack a couple and they have a few additional. The few additional ones that they have is plants often have a very large water vacuole inside the cell. It basically is a storage for water. Plants, unlike animals, can't just get up and walk to the river to get a drink. And so they have to take advantage of collecting water when they can. And so they store water inside their cells. Chloroplasts are another organelle found in plants, and those are found in plant leaves. sometimes in stems, but usually in leaves. And they're used for doing photosynthesis, which we'll cover a ton in chapter 5. And then the cell wall is basically what gives structure to the plant. This is what, when the plant cells in the middle of the plant die, this becomes wood. Okay, so it's like a really tough structure that allows plants to have some sturdiness. And then one thing that's kind of unique in plants is they actually have these holes called plasmodesmata. And plasmodesmata are little holes that allow the ER from one cell to actually pass through and meet up with the ER of another cell. Now remember, this is our transport system. So I can transfer molecules from one cell to the next in plants. And so it's a way that plants use communication. They communicate between cells by transferring information from one cell to the next to the next. It's not as fast as a circulatory system like we use for our hormones or our nervous system, which is super fast. But it's a way of responding in a reasonable amount of time. They can't respond quickly, but they can respond in a reasonable amount of time to predation and other things.